Greetings everyone, peace to you all.
Welcome to the edge of Erebus.
Welcome to another episode of Praiseworthy Reviews, where we go through video games to see if they are excellent and commendable. Today, we will be reviewing Hades 2, the sequel to the original 2020 roguelike dungeon crawler developed by indie studio Supergiant Games. Players play as Melinoe, princess of the underworld and sister of the protagonist of the first game, Zagreus, as she attempts to complete her lifelong goal of defeating Kronos, who attacked the gods and imprisoned her family. As usual, we will be evaluating the game based on 5 criteria: fun factor, educational value, cultural value, spiritual value, and cost. For context, prior to this review, I have finished the original Hades to the epilogue, and I have finished this game, Hades 2, to the true ending. I want to state that this review assumes that you have played the first game, and will make gameplay and story comparisons and references to the original. So if you have not played the original Hades, my personal recommendation is that you just go purchase and play that first. Hades 2 basically expects that you have played the first game, both for gameplay and narrative reasons, and if you are not afraid of long games, it is definitely worth your time. I also want to point out that this review was after post-launch patch 1, and is therefore a review of the game with its new true ending. As far as the technical state of the game is concerned, the game ran pretty flawlessly for me, although there does seem to be a memory leak, at least at the time of recording. So without further ado, let's jump in. The core gameplay mechanics of Hades 2 are almost identical to the first game with expanded options. Like the first game and most roguelikes, the gameplay loop in Hades 2 consists of dungeon crawling combat, usually referred to as runs, and metagame resource management to make runs easier. The combat in the main runs is the focus of the game. Like Zagreus, Melinoe's abilities consist of an attack, a special, a cast, and a dash. Despite having the same structure, Melinoe's kit feels fresh for a few reasons. In the first game, Zagreus used the weapons that the gods used to defeat the Titans, called the Infernal Arms. In Hades 2, Melinoe uses an entirely new set of weapons called the Nocturnal Arms that are similar but a little bit more creative than the original set. The weapons are widely varying and accommodate numerous playstyles, but in my opinion, overall the weapons lead Melinoe to take a more ranged approach than Zagreus' melee style. This style change is also hinted at through the casts. In the first game, Zagreus' cast was ranged bloodstones to complement his melee style. But in this game, Melinoe's cast is a binding circle, to prevent enemies from closing in while you are shooting at them from range. In addition to the attack, special, and casts, there are new Omega Charge abilities that the first game kind of had for some weapons, but it was not as structured. Omega abilities usually require magic, a new mana bar for charged, stronger abilities. Initially, I stayed away from Omega abilities because charging means not moving around, but I later warmed up to some of the options Omega abilities give you. Keepsakes are back and give you different abilities that can only be swapped between zones and runs. They are arguably the part of the game that was least innovated, but I'm okay with that. The game also introduces the concept of familiars, which are basically like a second keepsake that help out with passive benefits and occasional attacks. The Olympian boons and rewards that kept each run feeling distinct return, with many of the boons from the first game left mostly untouched. Even so, the boon system is kept fresh with new gods like Hestia and Hephaestus, new NPC competitions like Nemesis instead of Thanos, and new NPC rooms like Narcissus and Arachne. I particularly like the new infusion boons, which add a new level of depth to the strategy. Also new to the game are hexes, what is essentially a boon from Selene that is meant to be an ultimate ability that can only be activated after a lot of magic has been used. There are plenty of options for these, and I quickly found some favorites among them. The first game's main weakness was probably enemy variety, but Hades 2 also mixes things up by creating an entirely second route that is basically a separate set of environments, enemies, NPCs, and bosses that keeps things incredibly fresh, allowing you to switch back and forth at will. Not only does the second route provide more options, there is significantly more variety in the styles of rooms, particularly in the Fields of Mourning and the Rift of Thessaly. As far as the larger meta progression is concerned, Hades 2 has expanded this as well. Like in the first game, permanent upgrades can be made for Melinoe, although she uses an Arcana card system that requires a little more finesse and strategy than the Mirror of Night system that Zagreus had. Rather than expanding the House of Hades, Melinoe must use her cauldron to cast incantations to improve both the crossroads and the conditions on the two routes. One other new thing regarding the meta progression is the sheer amount of new materials and components used to progress. The first game had this as well, but not nearly to the extent of Hades 2. I initially disliked this, but I liked it a lot better once I understood the resource system, and I think overall the system does help you feel like you are always progressing. Finally, the Oath of the Unseen system is very similar to the old Pact of Punishment system, allowing the player to increase the difficulty for additional rewards. Mini-bosses are not particularly interesting, at least not until you spruce them up with Oaths of the Unseen, but the bosses themselves, the Guardians, are quite stylish and distinct. One thing I really liked about the bosses is that every now and then bosses would reveal new moves that they hadn't used in previous runs, always keeping the bosses feeling interesting and fresh, even before we begin to use the Oath of the Unseen. Like in the first game, the Oath of the Unseen system can significantly alter and power up the bosses even more, continuously evolving the boss fights to keep the runs from feeling repetitive. The gameplay is quite addictive, and even after successful runs, I want to get to the crossroads and check out what upgrades are available so that I can get out on my next run. The narrative is actually the final element in the fun. Normally we evaluate the narrative in the cultural value section, but I did want to point out that like the first game, the narrative is integrated with the gameplay. Progression in the narrative is tied to the character's overall progress and how far they have gotten in both routes. Like in the first game, there is still a narrative progression component associated with building relationships via gifts, with nectar and ambrosia. For those NPCs in the crossroads, there are additional gifts and cutscenes that can serve to progress relationships as well. Overall, I'm going to give Hades 2 5 stars for fun factor, because the gameplay is generally an improvement over the first game in almost every way. As far as educational value, the Hades series continues to be quite valuable. Hades 2, like its predecessor, once again helps with motor skill challenges. The combat feels a little less frenetic, and it feels like Hades 2 requires more surgical precision than the sheer speed of the first game. There are some minor mini-games for fishing and compelling shades that could offer some motor skill practice, but it's not much. There is of course strategic depth and problem solving in using the Arcana card system in conjunction with the boons. Factual knowledge is taught through highly referenced Greek mythology, which is again suggested and sometimes even explained through many of the NPCs, such as Prometheus, Odysseus, and Narcissus. Like the first entry, Hades 2 contains excellent diction and word choice that the players can learn from. And again, like the first game, the voice acting has the added benefit of teaching pronunciation of sometimes difficult phrases.
Twisted into the visage of the world-conquering Titan of Time.
Generally speaking, playing Hades 2 doesn't make you feel dumb, but cultured and intellectual, always learning something. So I'm going to assign Hades 2 5 stars for its educational value. The original Hades had an incredible cultural impact, winning the very first Hugo Award for video games, an award that is mostly for literature. Hades 2 continues to live up to the high bar set by the first game in most aspects, but does stumble in a few areas. The hand-painted environments, particularly when looking down over certain vantage points or looking up at the sky, are truly legendary. Hades 2 adds to the vantage points of the first game with a new style. Another improvement is how Arachne can change Malinois's outfits in ways that are not just functional, but aesthetically different, something that Zagreus could not do in the first game. The portraits of all the characters are also beautifully rendered, and I especially like the small touches, such as how Malinois's portrait changes sizes when she does. This might be a nitpick, but the animations of the portraits sometimes felt distracting. For example, I like the thundering of Zeus's hair, but the gleaming of his armor feels a tad bit overdone. Combat animations feel as sharp and as precise as the first game, with nothing to complain about. Malinois's new animations of compelling shades feels particularly smooth, and many of the boss animations are quite well done. The musical soundscape continues to be phenomenal, with many sound effects being brought back from the first game for easy association of what is going on. Similarly, the main theme of the original returns, or at least a variation of it, to bring back wonderful memories from the first. But to me, it is the wonderful new tracks, sung by in-game musicians like Scylla and the Sirens, Artemis, Malinois herself, and even Apollo, that take the music of the game to a legendary level. The song "I Am Gonna Claw Out Your Eyes and Drown You to Death" is surprisingly funny and good.
It is the dead of night within a haunted, barely moonlit thicket at the underworld's edge. There, a young forsaken princess hunts her prey.
The excellent Logan Cunningham returns as Homer the Storyteller, as well as many other important roles, like Hades and Kronos, bringing his signature enunciation that is one of the key attractions of Supergiant games. Like in the first game, the writing remains incredibly strong in its narrations and fourth wall responses from Malinois.
The keen-eyed princess finds a set of tracks, suggesting that her foe trod through this dusty ground not very long before.
Shush, Homer. How shall I ever catch her if you're going to describe my every move?
Similarly, most of the character development and dialogue also remains quite stylish and witty, even if the gods' puns sometimes border on dad joke territory. However, the plot seems weaker than in the first game and suffers from similar pacing issues, stretched across too many required successful runs for the true ending and the epilogue. Having now seen the patched ending, I don't think the original ending itself was the issue, but rather the pacing and the lead up towards it, as well as issues with the character development of the main characters. In my opinion, one of the most fundamental issues with the narrative is that Malinois, Hecate, and Kronos are much less likable than Zagreus and Hades, especially as the plot progresses. In Hades, the needling and put-downs between Zagreus and Hades were both humorous and moving, as they hinted at a dysfunctional father-son relationship that was still at its core one of a loving father and a loving son who were struggling to bridge their differences. However, the dynamics and themes being developed among Malinois, Hecate, and Kronos are significantly different and necessitate different character development, but leaves all of them generally unlikable. In fact, of the three, I actually found the antagonist, Kronos, to be the most likable. I also agree with the criticisms that there are some conflicts that are left unresolved and some themes that are left undeveloped that leave the narrative wanting. Although there have been no official sales numbers, some analysts estimate that Hades 2 has already reached over 2 million copies even in early access before launch. I would be surprised if there was a sequel to Hades 2, since this was the first sequel that Supergiant has ever done, and I imagine that the studio has some new ideas it wants to try out now.
Well, your battle prowess may be unsurpassed, but your ability to weave a yarn is not quite there.
Even though the story doesn't land as well as in the first game, the impact of the Hades series in procedural storytelling will likely be felt for years to come, so I'm still going to assign Hades 2 5 stars for its cultural value. The negative content of Hades 2 is very similar to the first game. There's some fantasy violence, with occasional blood splatters and bloody environments, but overall it's generally not too graphic. There's no drugs or substance abuse that I can remember, but there are references to alcohol, with nectar and ambrosia being common gifts to NPCs.
Headmistress, I have a bottle of ambrosia here and thought perhaps we could share it at the taverna.
In particular, Dionysus and the idea of drunkenness is mostly celebrated. There can be implied sex scenes where the screen is faded to black, and there's some suggestive noises made, but it's mostly restrained. There's also some hot springs scenes, although the scenes themselves don't show anything inappropriate. There are options and hints of homosexual and polyamorous relationships, although this is purely optional and not offensive. It is also hinted at that Chaos is neither male nor female and uses gender-neutral pronouns, but again, this feels less problematic than in most other situations. What is more concerning is the suggestiveness of Aphrodite. It's expected, but keep it in mind. What might be less expected but equally concerning is the suggestiveness of Dionysus, whose bulge is also quite provocative. The other aspect of the game that might bother some is the more explicit integration of the occult. Unlike the first game, where Zagreus is implied to have little or no powers of his own, Malinois clearly uses witchcraft, and occult themes and even phrases are present.
So mote it be.
While they didn't bother me too much, there's something to keep in mind, especially for younger players. Though there is a lot of negative content, there is quite a bit of positive content as well. Unlike Zagreus, Malinois generally has excellent manners and is a pretty good role model. She also has good relationships with many of the NPCs at the crossroads. ESRB rates the game as T for teen, which feels pretty reasonable. As far as the themes of the game, I think most of them are pretty biblical and generally positive. For more analysis on the themes of the game, check out my biblical themes videos for this game. Overall, I'm going to give Hades 2 4 stars for spiritual value. Like in the first game, the cost remains difficult to analyze. For the time poor, the game is quite demanding of your time if you intend to see the true ending. Even being reasonably successful at my runs, it took me about 50 hours to get to the true ending, which I think is way too much. Honestly, it takes way too many victories to reach the true ending, something that was an issue in the first game as well. For the time rich, in terms of optional content, the game has additional relationships to resolve and the ever-increasing and scalable difficulty with the vow system. And of course, there is some crossroads renovation and interior designing to be done. Hades 2 retails for $29.99 USD, and I think this is excellent value. Overall, based on the content value, narrative accessibility, and asking price, I'm going to give Hades 2 4 stars for cost. I enjoyed the original Hades so much that it, along with Hollow Knight, were two of the original reasons why I even started this channel. Hades 2 is bigger and better than the first game in many ways, particularly in terms of the fun factor and its gameplay. There's a lot more variety to the experience it provides in terms of different routes, more enemy variety, and more complex build options. There are more NPCs, challenging bosses, and a fresh coat of paint that makes the game feel like a new experience. Despite the genuinely better gameplay, the game doesn't feel quite as magical as the first entry, even if the motifs say otherwise. The space that the unique father-son dynamic of the first game leaves isn't filled with something equally satisfying, and in the end, the drawn-out pacing of the story weakens the experience overall.
We fought. I prevailed. Oh, blast. I was supposed to weave a yarn.
Despite these weaknesses, I still think that Hades 2 is a legendary time, even if it doesn't quite live up to the heartwarming narrative of the first entry.
My only criticism, if I may, is that all too many tales involving huge monstrosities resolve that way.
Based on the criteria discussed in the video, I subjectively assign Hades 2 the rating of priority purchase. That's all I have for you in this video. Bless you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If this video blessed you in some way, please consider watching some of my other videos, subscribing, sharing the video with your friends, or sharing with me some of your thoughts in the comments below.